So, as I say, welcome along to Amelia Asks. Members of the Amelia's Young Consultants Programme have developed and organised Amelia Asks, which is a series of free online events offering insights into the careers of professionals from the arts and heritage sector. The Young Consultants researched and contacted industry professionals, inviting them along to give a short talk about their career, which will be followed by an in-conversation and a question and answer session. The members of the Young Consultants group have helped to devise the events, market and promote the events. The Young Consultants programme at the Amelia offers local residents aged between 16 and 25 the chance to gain some experience in the arts and heritage sector, as well as to help to shape the future programming at the Amelia. What's the Amelia? The new cultural and learning space, the Amelia, will bring together the former Museum and Art Gallery, Library, Tourist Information Centre, Gateway Services and the Kent Adult Education Service in Tunbridge Wells. The new audience-centred building will bring alive unexpected stories about Tunbridge Wells and will hopefully challenge some of the perceptions that the town has with an ambitious and exciting programme of exhibitions and events. The integrated service will be housed in the former Library, Museum and Art Gallery. That's the building you can see in the picture at the front. And the former adult education building, which is the building down to the left, which is situated both in the centre of Tunbridge Wells. The buildings are currently undergoing major renovation works, including a beautiful extension to link the buildings together. That's the part you can see in the middle. So I'd like to take this moment at the beginning to thank our funders, who are the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Arts Council England, Kent County Council and Tunbridge Wells Borough Council. Without them, none of this would be possible, so we thank them for their support. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the third in a series of Amelia Asks events. Today, I've got the great pleasure of welcoming young consultant member Charlotte and her special guest, Matt White. So I'm going to hand over now to Charlotte. So over to you, Charlotte.
Yes, hello, thank you. So as Ed said, I'm Charlotte and I'm a young consultant. And I'm very excited to introduce to you our speaker today, Matt White from Architecture. So without further ado, over to Matt.
Hello, everybody. I understand that it might be helpful to give you a little bit of a picture of how I've ended up as an architect, if any of you are interested in going down that route professionally, some of the choices you might consider making. So what I can helpfully say, I think, to any of you considering architecture as a career, is that I'm an accidental architect. So it can take a long time to qualify. The fastest qualification to architecture takes 7 years. So it's a little bit unusual to arrive at that point accidentally, but it does happen. I originally, I think when I was about 10, 11, something like that, I wrote to NASA because I wanted to be a spaceman. And I guess in some ways you could say that I have ended up as a spaceman. It's just that I manipulate space in cities rather than sit within it in a spacesuit orbiting the Earth. So, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. So one of the great joys of architecture is that it's a very wide-ranging profession. So it's a field of study that can take you in lots of different directions, but it's also one that really combines both the arts and the sciences as interests. And part of the reason I ended up doing it was because when I was trying to make my A-level choices, this may be coming up for some of you at the moment, my school were very keen to stream me into either doing the arts, as they saw it, or the sciences, which meant, if I was going to go and do English and ceramics or something like that, I had to give up biology and economics. And I didn't think that was a very good thing. I thought I should be studying what I wanted to study rather than just being streamed into one thing or another. So I ended up doing A-levels that combined interest in arts and sciences. I did maths, and I did physics, and I did English, and I did art. And what's good for me about architecture is that it combines all of those interests. It combines the physics that explain how you hold up, the weight of a building. It's the maths of making sure that the area required inside the building is correct and that it's affordable to build. It's the English of communicating the building design in reports and documents to those people that are either going to give permission for the building or use it. And it's the art of hoping you create a building that is beautiful and leaves the world a little prettier than you found it. And actually, what's been rather fun for me in particular is that when I said I did art A level, within that I was actually studying ceramics, and my final exam was lots of different pots and pans and all that sort of thing. And nowadays I'm getting to create buildings where I'm working with ceramic manufacturers and doing very detailed bespoke manufacturing of ceramics on a very large scale. In particular, using sort of digital modeling and fabrication techniques to make that happen. So I suppose, these sort of strands run through a career. So the nice thing is that you can find things that you're interested in when you're younger, and you can do them when you're older. I mean, in many ways, I'd say I don't really work because I enjoy what I do so much that I don't really see it as work. I just do it because I enjoy it. Zoom calls are something else, but we're all getting used to those, aren't we? So I suppose what I'm saying is that if you're considering being an architect, then it's useful to have subjects that bridge, both science and art. It's also true to say that there were plenty of people when I was studying who didn't select from sort of both areas, that they had just studied art or they had just studied sciences. And they got on fine. They got on fine as well. So it's quite a forgiving degree. It's actually the sort of base degree. If you go to Italy, it's about the most common degree you can do in Italy because it's seen as such a central part of that country's culture and identity. In the same way, perhaps that an English degree over here is a default degree. So the way that the architecture course is structured, because it's a professional degree, it's a course that is quite long. Much like if you study to be a doctor, I think the Bachelor of Medicine is a minimum of 5 years. I think if you're studying to be a lawyer, that's also 4 or 5 years. So it can take quite a long time. And the architecture degree is split into 2 components. So you would essentially have a mixture of studying at university and studying in practice, and studying with people who are in practice. And I enjoyed that bit enormously because you get your hands dirty. It's the real practicality of making things on site. So if you like using your hands, it's quite a good thing to study, because you get to use your hands if you want to. You get to make things. And the way the courses work is that you do an undergraduate degree, and then you might go off and work for a year or so, and then you do another degree, which is good fun because it means you get to go to university twice. And then after that, you have to do a bit more study before you get your final qualifications. It's also the case that while I completed that professional qualification, probably close to 20 years ago now, which is horrifying. I still feel like I'm learning every day, which is a real treat. If you're well, I suppose you take things in the direction that your interest lies. But I'm always very interested in how things work. I've always been interested in taking things apart. I was a child that used to take radios apart to see how they would work. I can't say I ever particularly understood. So my bedroom was littered with broken radios. But I took that up a scale, and I remember taking cars apart and trying to put those back together again when I was older. So it's something where you really can sort of try to understand things, and that interest in taking things apart, trying to understand how things work, definitely is something that I can still do, and the opportunities are still there. So one of the things that's been really fun for me over the last few years is the evolution of digital technologies, and in particular 3D printing, which has enabled us to make very bespoke components for buildings at an affordable scale. If you think of some of the buildings that you might like in the towns and cities near you, they're possibly older buildings that have some character. They're possibly buildings that are very decorated, and many years ago, people were able to make those buildings because, frankly, labour was quite cheap, and you could get craftsmen and things to spend a long time making beautiful bits of buildings because it was quite cheap to do so. Happily now, people are paid more money, so it's much more expensive to get people to do that. Unhappily, that means that a lot of the buildings that we build nowadays are much less decorative. They are often quite flat looking. They might be shiny. There's a place for that, don't get me wrong, but it's been quite heartening, I think, recently. If you look at some of the buildings that are starting to be built now, they're a lot more decorative, and it's because these digital fabrication techniques have allowed us to make decorative buildings in an affordable way, and that's purely people working at the edge of the technologies that are available now, which is some of the things that I'm interested in, is certainly what we try to do as a practice. I could probably show you some examples if that was interesting. Charlotte, how do you want me to do this? Do you want me to sort of go into an example of a building, or do you want to reflect on the comments I've just made at all, or what would you like to do next? I can roll straight on if you like.
I think if you get to the building, that'd be really interesting. So we can look at sort of, I guess.
Okay, so I might if I shared there's a couple of things that might be interesting. I think probably I might just show you a couple of things actually from our portfolio, just to illustrate what I'm talking about in the first instance. So if you give me 1 second, I will find it. Okay, here's a good page. So okay, let's have a look at this. So yeah. Yeah, okay. Right. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay with everyone. So this page you're seeing now is a sort of sketch of the basic arrangement of a building that we're working on in Soho at the moment. It's right in the centre of town. So just to the left, this green area that you see here is Soho Square, and we're doing a block that is almost an entire city block in the middle of Soho. But the reason I've got this up is actually not really because of this. It's because of these objects here, and these are little rose-shaped, scalloped tiles that we're covering part of the building in. And if you look at these two at the bottom here, these are ones where we printed a design that we'd come up with on the computer. We printed that as a 3D positive. We then cast silicon around that, and then into the silicon cast these tiles here, which are a mixture of plaster and metal fiber, which gives them the sort of metallic look. Really just to experiment with whether this abstracted rose pattern we were interested in would work. And these fit together, so you can do big tiled walls of these. And then we were able to take the molds that we created for these, and we gave them to a tile manufacturer in Portugal, and we asked them to try experimenting with different levels of blue glaze onto the tile. And the reason for that is that we discovered when we were doing the archaeology for the site here that a chap called Wedgwood, who was a very famous designer and manufacturer of pottery in the 19th century, used to have his London workshop here. And if you look him up online, you'll see that he used to make mass manufactured pots that were a sort of mimicking the pots that were made by the ancient Greeks and Romans, and he became very rich and famous by being able to make these incredible pots using mass manufacturing techniques. And so the reason that we picked a blue tile here is that a lot of the pots he made were blue, and they were this sort of blue, and it was a nice way for us to make a connection between the past of the site, the history of the site, and its future. The other thing is that the road along the side here used to be called Rose Street, and there was a pub on the corner called the Rose. So we got quite excited about producing a form where, if you tried hard, and some of you may be giggling and thinking, I can't see that at all, but if you try hard, you can sort of see a rose form in here. Now, if I move on through this, we then, you can see here, we're able to use that pattern elsewhere in the building. So these images on the left here are examples of where we've been 3D printing the pattern onto panels in our office that we then use to make this big model. And we made this all ourselves in the workshop. So, you know, as I say, for those of you that are interested in using your hands, you know, even as a professional architect, you can, you know, spend time making lovely models like that. You don't, it doesn't always have to be at the drawing board. But more than that, we were able to print panels in the office at such a scale that we could actually give them to the manufacturers up in Doncaster to cast these great big panels here, which ended up being here the actual panels that are being fitted to the building at the moment. So you can see a direct evolution there from making, you know, things digitally on a computer screen, printing those out physically, scaling those up to a one-to-one scale, and actually installing them on a building in London, which I thought was kind of quite a fun thing to do. So I thought you'd be interested in that. I wonder what else I've got in here. Ah, yes, no, this is quite interesting. So this sort of shows that process. In fact, you can see here, see these little rubber molds here. You can see that these are the inverse of the castings we've made here. And also just up there, if I zoom in, I wonder if I can do that usefully. You can see in, whoops, hang on, what's happened? Okay. You can see here, these are some of the panels and molds we made to create that model I was showing you, that little corner model I was showing. So on this table here, which is just a sort of picture taken from the office of various different models and whatnot that we've made for different buildings over time, you can see the variety of stuff, not just that we get to design, but that we get to make in-house. So, you know, as I say, it's not all just sort of sitting at a drawing board or doing maths or physics. It is making stuff as well. Now, I wonder what else we've got in here. These are some other models that we've made for that same project. Down to the left here are what are called massing models. So if you've ever walked past a building and thought, you know, gosh, that's big, or doesn't that look funny next to the building next door? These models are designed to try to mitigate that. So this is where we're looking at the overall size of the building to see whether it fits snugly into its environment. And we would make these models out of polystyrene and just cut them with hot wire. It's quite a sort of intuitive process. You chop around the shapes until you get something that you think works. But it's not just about sort of, you know, chopping and adding here. You can also cut into it. So you can see a shape here that looks like a sort of it's a sort of semi-curved sheet of glass that you can see a little bit through here, which is a glass atrium, a courtyard space, in fact, that we've taken into the basement of that same building to provide natural light into the basement areas, and at the bottom of it, we've put a garden. Now, I know that some of you are on this talk because you're interested in the arts sector. So the nice thing about architecture is that not only do you get to sort of be quite creative and artistic in the production of the architecture, but you quite often work for people who are working in the arts. And one of the exciting things about this building is that the whole of this basement area here is going to be taken by Warner Brothers, who are the people obviously who made the Harry Potter movies and Batman and stuff like that. And we've now carved out of here a great big sound stage so that they can do post-production editing of sound for their movies and their TV shows. So, you know, you get to work with some really interesting clients. Actually, prior to this, and I might even have a picture of this here, I'm not sure. Another building I got to work on in London, just in parallel with this, really, is a new rotating theatre, which also includes a burlesque club and a nightclub and all sorts of fun things like that. This is something else I could come back to, but that's believe it or not, that's a house. So for those of you that like designing houses that look like spaceships, there's space for that too. And then here, yes, this is another image of that model I was talking about earlier. But we've also got laser cutters in the office, which you've probably used at school. And this is a little sort of bus shelter thing we were designing, where you get to make the entire bus shelter out of 8x4 sheets of plywood. And that can be printed off and constructed anywhere. So the manufacturing of that bus shelter can happen at the location of the bus shelter rather than being manufactured in a central plant. So what else have we got here? Yeah, this one might be interesting. So for those of you that like houses, this is my house in London, which is called, perhaps for unsurprising reasons, number 23, which you can see in here. And I think one of the things you have to be, if you want to be an architect, is you have to be an optimist, and you have to be ready to see the world in a way that's a little different to the way that other people see it. Your job, if you like, is to think the things that others aren't thinking. If you end up in a big meeting, you know, certainly as an architect, there are a lot of people in that meeting who are doing things that ultimately are sort of processes. So they're costing a building, or they are walking through a planning process, or they are calculating the areas for a building. And one of the fun things, but one of the sort of slightly terrifying things about, you know, being an architect is that part of your job is to do the thing that no one else is thinking of and that no one else can do. And the reason I say that's terrifying is that you don't always know whether you're going to be able to sort of come up with something. You know, but if you can come up with something, you can get people to buy into it and think it's a good idea. You can often end up with some quite sort of surprising results. So when I started designing this house, I certainly didn't think it was going to look like this. But you know, you go on a journey that navigates through planning constraints. It navigates through the opinions of your neighbors. It navigates through the opinions of your family who are going to live there. It has to accommodate, you know, the structural requirements from the structural engineer. It has to accommodate the requirements of building control. It has to be comfortable to live in, and it has to be joyful. And, you know, for me, that ended up as this building, and it was a great pleasure to live in there. I could probably show you some pictures inside. I don't know where they are. Oh yeah, this. A lot of architects start with Lego. So here's a bit of Lego for you. I think Lego do a series of models in black boxes where they do little models of some of the world's most celebrated buildings. So things like, you know, the Empire State Building and the Eiffel Tower and all that sort of stuff. And when we finished the building in London, one of my kids was asking me whether it was a great building or not. And I thought, well, I can't really judge that. But I know that all the world's best buildings have a Lego model. made after them. So we decided to make this Lego model of the building, and we made all the instructions, and we made the box to put it in. So there are, there is space to regress as well as to progress in architecture. What else have I got in here? No, this is a document that just is a general portrait of work, so I don't think I'll go through this in too much more detail. This last image there might be of interest because the other thing that I think architecture allows you to do is it allows you to see the world and to see the cities and spaces around you in a different way to those that don't study architecture, and it allows you to see opportunity. And one of the things that I've been thinking of recently, particularly during this lockdown, and you will have seen that many more people that go to work are now basically not going to work in the cities, they're working at home. And I think what we're going to see as a permanent kind of consequence of COVID is lots of people deciding that they want to work much closer to their homes, and we'll see more shared workspaces around and about the country rather than just in cities. And I have a little bit of space near my house in Sussex, where I'm speaking to you from, where I thought I could build a nice groovy new office. And so these were my thoughts on what that might look like. So I thought we'll have a nice view out to the left there, and then to the right, you can see the building looks a little bit like a hill, a little bit like the hills around it. What you can't see in this picture is that I'm at one end of this village, and at the other end of the village, in the other kind of road that leads into it, there's a rather handsome 19th century building with a big copper dome, and the copper dome has gone green, exactly like the copper covering of this building here. So it's like the opening and closing of the sentence that is our village. So I don't know. I mean, there's a little picture of a few of the bits of work that I've been looking at recently, and hopefully a few pointers on some of the things you might consider studying if you want to go into architecture, and some of the opportunities you can have. I would say that I've shown you here, I think, 3 or 4 buildings of probably about, I think it's about 250 so far that we've designed in the office. So depending on what comes out of our Q&A, I will try and dig out some others. If people like to see big towers or classical buildings or inside people's houses, I can dig some of those out. Or I can help answer your questions as to how you might, study architecture or where else architecture could lead for you. So Charlotte, do we want to do a few questions now, or I can fire into some other stuff?
Yeah, well, some questions. Thank you very much for everything you said and for your talk. I know I'm very interested in when you were talking about how you sort of accidentally fell into it. I think that's interesting, coming from someone who's sort of making all these big decisions now and seeing how things can turn out maybe how you don't expect them. I think that's interesting. So I've got some questions that I'm going to ask. If anybody else has any questions, please add them to the meeting chat, and in about 10-15 minutes we can go through them and answer any questions you may have. So I guess one thing I had sort of got from your talk, I found it really interesting how you're talking about how you took inspiration. So you said that when, like, on the building where you did with the 3D printings with the rose sort of design, how you took inspiration from like the rose formation. I think so. I guess sort of my question is, what sort of process do you go through when you get a new project, and what kind of things do you want to put into it, and I guess how do you sort of form it together, I guess, is my sort of question.
Well, it's I think one of the things you're always trying to do. So there's this, the architecture as a profession. Clearly I was talking there about how my experience of it is that it combines sciences and arts, but it's often described as combining 2 other things as well, which is the pure practicality of having to meet the demands of either a resident or an office worker or a manufacturer or whatever. So you have to provide a certain amount of space at a certain temperature, a certain humidity, with the number of air changes per hour, and it needs to be strong enough to hold this many books or that many milling machines, etc. But you're also trying to combine that with with an artistic sense. You want it to be, as I say, buildings last longest when they're loved. When people like looking at them and like being inside them. And we've all been into buildings where happily sometimes you say, oh, this feels good, or indeed buildings where you think this doesn't feel very good, feels not very nice, or it's a bit depressing to look at, or whatever it may be. So I normally start the process with a combination of two things. One is the brief from the client, because someone will own the piece of land and they'll say, I want to build a hotel, or I want to build a house, and what those, you look at what those requirements are, along with an analysis of the site. So you would find that, building in Barbados would be very different to building in Burnley. One of the places is pretty hot and pretty wet, and the other is, well, pretty cold and pretty wet as well. But one building would require lots of insulation and the other one might not. One might require air conditioning and the other one might not. There'll be lots of different technical requirements. One might require lots of shading. One might require mosquito screens and the other one might not. But you're looking at where people access the site. You're looking at where the sun is. You're looking at if it's an office building, for example, does it have a front entrance for staff and a back entrance for deliveries, that sort of thing. And once you've got it basically organized and sort of where the stairs are and where the edges of the building are, you then start the process of sort of what does it look like, and quite often the bones of what it looks like emerge from what the plan is, how it's organized on the site. But there are other things that you can do, and we as you spotted there, we ended up with this rose motif on that building because it's on Rose Street and it's where the Rose pub used to be, and there's lots of other things to do with roses there, and we thought it was quite a nice direction to go in, but we were deliberately abstracting it so that other people could see other things. We weren't sort of necessarily forcing a rose down their throat. But we did a building recently in Wimbledon where we discovered that Joseph Paxton's brother had a nursery plantation on the site, 100 years ago, where he grew great big palm fronds. Joseph Paxton was the gardener who also designed the Crystal Palace for the Great Exhibition 1851. So if you look that up, it's a pretty impressive bit of work. But we got very carried away then with all of the palm fronds that he had catalogued, and we started to make 3D models of those. We made them by hand and we made them digitally, and we ended up casting these huge ceramic panels where they're covered in palm fronds and they all interlock together, and then we glazed them with a rich green glaze, which sort of echoed some of the finishes that you saw in the Victorian buildings. The building was in a conservation area, so there's lots of Victorian buildings around about, and it sort of echoed all of that. And it's really fun actually to take some of these little discoveries that you make on site and just try to get the building to the design to resonate with that, and perhaps reveal some things to the people that live there that perhaps they didn't know beforehand. It kind of makes it part of its place and part of its time.
Yeah. Well, I guess another thing that I found very interesting in your talk, you were talking about how as you went into architecture, you find, although you've gone through your degrees and everything, but you're finding you're still learning and everything. And I was wondering, I saw on your website that you have sort of a team of lots of different people, and I wonder sort of how much, I guess, learning comes from your team, and also how you get the best out of your team when you're working.
Well, I think one of the sort of tragedies at the moment is that it's quite a collaborative process, architecture, and it's, there's so much that you can do on Teams and Zoom and all that sort of stuff. but there's lots that you can't do. So one of the, we actually have our office open now because everyone was desperate to get back to the office. It's just, you've got a comfier chair in the office, and you've got better coffee, and you've got lots and lots of modeling machines and computers and virtual reality headsets and things to play with. So a lot of people were keen to get back, and in particular some of our younger members of the team, where as I say, I'm still learning, and I'm definitely learning lots about technology and whatnot from our younger staff, but they also are learning as well, and it's a very different environment learning in an office to learning at university or online, and a big part of it is serendipity. So what you might find is that an experienced architect is talking to one of his colleagues about some detailing on a building, and you'll hear them banging on about something called EPDM, and they'll go, well, where does the EPDM go? Does it go there or there, or does it wrap over this, and what have you, and does it have to be 150 mil? And as a young architect, I might have been sitting there going, oh, what's EPDM? And then I'd look it up and I'd discover that it's a waterproofing membrane. But I notice actually, even just doing this talk, very often when you're having a conversation with someone, someone will interrupt you and go, what about this? What about that?
Yeah.
But of course, that hasn't happened. So it's unlikely that you're going to hear someone having a side conversation. You get a little bit on the side chat, don't you, on the side, but you don't have so much of those sort of incidental moments where you're just learning through osmosis. And actually, I was very, very lucky early on in my career. So when I was about 21, I think. And there's a very famous architect in the UK called Norman Foster, who designed things like the Gherkin in London, or the Millennium Bridge, which I got to work on, or Stansted Airport. These are kind of very famous buildings. And when I started out, as I say, age 20 or 21, I actually my desk was opposite his. I was in his office opposite him. And I found it incredibly inspiring listening to the conversations that he was having with the senior staff around him, and listening to the perspective that he had as a sort of someone who'd already been in the profession for 20 or 30 years. And I was just sitting there trying to make sure I didn't mess up my drawings. So I think that's really important. The collaborative nature of architecture really wants people to be together. So we're finding it quite difficult as a practice at the moment because we don't get that, which is why everyone's migrating back to the office. And the second thing, in terms of trying to get the best out of people, everyone will have their own way of doing it. But, I didn't come into architecture to manage people. I like drawing, I don't like managing. But if you run a practice, you end up having to do so. So the approach we take very much is to empower people as much as we can, but in the words of Spider-Man's step uncle or whatever it is, with great power comes great responsibility. So you just have to make sure that if you give someone a lot of responsibility, that or a lot of authority over what they're doing, that they understand that there's a responsibility. And it's also incumbent on me to support them. And it sounds silly, this, because it can be scary because buildings are really expensive things, but it's really, really important that, particularly the young people in our office, it's really important that they mess up a lot, that they make mistakes, because it's only by making mistakes and then having to fix the mistakes that they can sort of really understand how important it is not to make a mistake.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult. You don't learn how to stand up unless you've fallen over. You have to make mistakes to learn, but we have to allow people to make mistakes in a way that doesn't mess up the overall process. So yeah, lots of empowerment, lots of responsibility, because that gets the best out of people, I think. If they feel like they're authors of their own destiny, that helps a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I guess another question I was interested in, and I think someone on the chat also talks about this. So I guess I was going to ask if there are any other architects that have inspired you, and then I think somebody asked if you have a favorite building or buildings made by other architects.
So there's some quite interesting answers to this. So I said earlier in the talk that I was an accidental architect, because actually, even though I originally wanted to be a spaceman, by the time I went to university to study architecture, I still didn't want to be an architect. What I wanted to do was be a car designer. I thought that'd be really cool. So I wanted to design all sorts of different cars, because as I said, I spent some time taking them apart and putting them together again. But by the time you finished studying architecture for 3 years, you see how cities work, and you see that cars aren't great for cities for the most part. So by the time I finished studying architecture, I'd gone off the idea of doing car design. And the reason I didn't go straight into car design is that you can't. It's a postgraduate degree. So I had to do a degree to start with. And I didn't really care what it was. I just thought I'll just do something that combines my interests. And I came out of university into a global recession. So there weren't many jobs around. So I'm familiar with what's going on at the moment. My family many years ago used to live in Hong Kong. So I thought, oh, I'll just go to Hong Kong and see what that's like. So I worked over the summer and got enough money together to go to Hong Kong. And with no real intention of being an architect or studying architecture. But coincidentally, when I was there, I went to Foster and Partners' office, who were building the airport at the time, and I managed to get a job, and so that kept me in architecture for a year longer. But it was working with, I think there are probably only 2 architects that I would have wanted to work for if I kept going with architecture after university, and one was Norman Foster and the other was Richard Rogers, both of whom I find very inspiring. Richard Rogers did the Pompidou Centre in Paris, of course. There was quite a fun, I hope I can get, I don't think this is rude. This is rude-ish, but I think it's probably allowed. Which when I left university, and there was a saying about where you could go and work, and the 3, these 2 architects, you'd want to work for either Fosters or Rogers, and people used to say, well, you could either be fostered by Rogers, or you could be Rogered by Fosters. Yeah, it's the other way around. So it was quite an interesting inversion, if you like, of the work experience. The person I really liked when I was young was the work of Antonio Gaudi, who did the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. I don't know if anyone's look it up. It's like a cathedral out of a kind of movie. It's an extraordinary looking thing. So I thought that was amazing. So I think, yeah, probably the building that inspired me as much as any when I went into architecture was the Sagrada Familia by Antoni Gaudi in Barcelona. But as I said, to a certain degree, I didn't really have much inspiration because I didn't really intend to be an architect. So
yeah, no, yeah, that's it. So I think now I'm gonna look. I think we've had another question on the meeting chats. Please, like I said, if anyone has questions, do put them on. So this one is someone's interested in studying architecture. Sorry, and have been told that they might benefit from doing an art foundation course, and they're asking, or should they just go straight to a degree?
So that's a good question. I very nearly did an art foundation course, but not to do architecture. I was just interested, and I think the only real reason I would do an art foundation course if I wanted to study architecture would be if I hadn't done any art beforehand. So if you'd just been studying, say, the sciences and languages, I don't know, chemistry, economics and French, for example, and then you wanted to study architecture, one of the things that the university will ask for as part of the application process is a portfolio. It might start with just a sketchbook with sort of, I remember when I ended up applying, I spent sort of a couple of weeks just going around drawing buildings in a sketchbook just to show, if you like, that I could do it. And if you're not very confident at drawing, obviously an art foundation course is going to help you draw or paint or sculpt or see. It's going to give you some skills that you don't have. But if you've already got a sketchbook or a portfolio or anything that demonstrates your interest in making or photography or drawing or you might maybe even digitally modeling, then I don't think you'd need to. The other thing I suppose to consider is, depending on how the application process timings are, you might be able to simultaneously apply for an architecture degree and an art foundation course. And in the event that you're unsuccessful with your architecture application, at least then you're ready to go and do the art foundation course, if your portfolio wasn't strong enough.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, and also, yeah, because I think it's a sort of a difficult thing to think about, like degrees and sort of thing. But yeah,
it's tricky. It's all tricky. But
yeah.
Headline, I would say just do something that you enjoy. Please do something you enjoy, because it very quickly stops being work if you're enjoying what you're doing. I know we're all told to go off and do things that are responsible and go off and be, whatever it is, but do something that interests you. Otherwise, you'll be sorry for the rest of your life. Please do something that interests you.
Yeah, well, I was going to say sort of what advice do you have for like young people to take away, but I guess try and find something that you enjoy. And
yeah, I think because it's difficult to fake, I mean, I think if you do something you enjoy, your enthusiasm and passion for the subject, I mean, whether it be I mean, so one of the downsides of doing architecture is it takes quite a long time.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I enjoy doing a lot is cooking and drawing. And one of the great things about both of those is that they're both creative acts, but you get to see the result within half an hour if you're doing a sketch, or making a big cake or whatever it may be. I suspect that's why everyone's been baking during lockdown, because it's such a creative act and you get to eat the process at the end of it. But no, you've got to do something you enjoy. And as I say, there are, if you do something you're interested in as well. I mean, in a sense, what I do is very traditional. Architecture is it's a profession, for goodness sake. And I suspect you will have been told by your peers or your teachers or whatever that many of the jobs that you might end up doing don't yet exist, whether it be a drone maintenance expert, or artificial intelligence virus detector, or meat-free burger designer. Whatever they may. There are plenty of jobs that I think are going to exist that don't yet exist. And of course, if you're doing what you're passionate about and what you're interested in, you're going to bring that interest and that passion to whatever it is that you end up doing. And I mean, I just find life interesting, and if the architecture stopped tomorrow, there's plenty of things that I think I could go and do, because I just am interested in everything. But I think it's very sad just to do something because you think it's the right thing. I'm not saying not everyone's going to go and be a rock star, but if you do want to be a rock star and you study music or whatever, you can take those skills and you can do commercial music, or you could, I mean, there's all sorts of things you can go, or you could direct music at a theatre whenever they reopen. There's lots of things you can do with something that you're interested in. I would please do something you love, would be my top tip.
Okay, we have another question which sort of goes off from that, but I guess the most important piece of advice for someone who's decided to study architecture.
Most important piece of advice, someone studied architecture. What would that be? Well, probably that comment I just made about making sure that you get to enjoy it. I think I would also say remember to switch off. It can be very, very demanding. It's a very heavy schedule in terms of, I think I had sort of 22, 23 hours of lectures each week, on top of which you're doing studio time. And the problem is, if you've got a drawing board in your bedroom, which is, or your computer, for example, in your bedroom, which is likely to be the case when you're at university, you sort of roll out of bed and work, and then you feel guilty the moment you stop working, and it's incredibly unhealthy. So the big difference for me between when I did my 1st degree at Manchester and my 2nd degree at Edinburgh is at Manchester I I worked in my bedroom, and I think it was very unhealthy. And at Edinburgh, I forced myself to work in the studio, and that meant that when I finished at 5 or 6 in the evening, I went off and I did some sport or had a meal or whatever it was I was doing, and it got my head off things and meant that I was able to be refreshed in the morning, and all those things that I was getting stuck with the day before, you come into it with a sort of fresh perspective. But if it's just going around your head all the time, so yeah, I suppose one of the top tips would be that if you want to do architecture, make sure you spend quite a lot of time not doing architecture. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you'll do it better.
Thank you. So if anyone has any questions, please put them on the chat. I think we're good for questions, I think.
I think so, yeah. I was just going to say, I seem to be coming to an end, but thank you, Matt, for a really interesting, engaging talk. It's so nice to see your portfolio as well, and to hear your really personal experience. So thank you very much. And Charlotte, thanks for leading us, and yeah, with some great questions as well. So
well, I hope that's helped a few people with their choices.
Yeah, it was interesting what you were saying about foundation, because I did a foundation. I can see exactly what you mean about it leaves some doors open, but it's not entirely necessary.
Yeah, and I mean, at a purely experiential level, I'm sad that I didn't do a foundation, because it looked like it was really interesting.
It's
But
great.
I already had enough to kind of take me where I was kind of going, if you see what I mean. Because of course, a foundation course could take you in. I mean, it may well have been, if I had done a foundation course, I wouldn't have done architecture. I would have gone off and done something else. So, but as soon as you find something interesting, you just run with it. Run with it. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think all the questions seem to be sort of come to an end. So everyone seems to be pleased with that. So yeah, again, thank you both for your time and for your efforts for that. It's really interesting to hear. And yeah, but those that have joined us late, or you want to rewatch some things, we will be posting the recording up online soon, and with a sort of summary as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and see you soon.
all right, well, it's been great fun. So
yeah, thanks. See
Thank
you.
you very much.
Bye.